What's good, everybody? Welcome to my channel. My name is JustClark, and today I'm gonna be talking about my entire drawing process, so from sketch to finish, and talk about the thought process and all the decisions that I make when I work on an illustration. So I'm gonna be walking y'all through that right now. Yeah. All right, so this is the part that we all dread, right? The blank white fucking canvas. You just have literally no idea what to draw, and so this is really the hardest part, even for me. But what you have to understand that the drawing process starts not here, but in your head. I like to brainstorm way before I open the canvas, or sometimes I'd open the canvas just to get me like, okay, I need to draw something. But first things first is that you need to think about what you want to draw, what you want to show, who you want to draw. You need to ask the purpose of your drawing. So my example here would be Serika. My thought process here is more just like, okay, what parts about Serika do I like? Obviously, we want the whole swimsuit to be shown. We want to get Serika's expression right. And when we're thinking of the character, we also want the pose to be something that the character would actually do. Like, it's on character, right? Serika would not really go for a super cutesy pose without feeling embarrassed because she's a fucking tsundere. Obviously, we can deviate from that, but that's just kind of like anchoring thought process that I have for myself. I just did this more of like a warm-up at the same time, but this is the main focus that I wanted, so you know. In terms of sketching, I like to make an underdrawing. It's still good to make sure that your foundation is very strong. So when I make the underdrawing, the main things that I think about would be the proportions of the character. Obviously, I want the model of the character to be in model. So if I'm drawing Serika, obviously I'm not gonna be drawing like super big mommy energy type model, nor would I be drawing an absolute lolly, because Serika is kind of like in between. That's the first thing, because the character is the main point of the illustration, right? They're the main focus of the illustration, so you want them taking up most of the screen for the most part. The next thing, I like to put the shape of the eye. It goes hand in hand with the proportions, because then you understand how big their eyes are. So proportions are very, very important. Of course, we have perspective. We have little perspective lines here, as you can see, just for me to remember and be more consistent with the perspective, so nothing feels off when we get to the drawing. I also like to add the little background shapes. I just go with the main big shapes and then just add on to them onto the final sketch. Just the most important big shapes, because these shapes also matter in the composition. If we took away these shapes, it'll feel very, very empty. But once we add these little shapes, we can figure out like where we can put them, how we can place them, so that the composition feels more complete and not lacking. And then now we have the clean sketch right here. And the clean sketch, for the most part, it's just, you just have to put the character on. The model that you drew on the underdrawing is the foundation. So in terms of character drawing, I can maybe make a separate video on that, because it's gonna be too long for this video for going through the entire process. So yeah, now that we have the clean sketch right here, I like to put down the main lighting. I'm very mindful of shapes when it comes to lighting. Shapes define the form of the character. So if you choose like a shape that makes the face look flat, then the face is gonna look flat. No matter how good the lighting is, the face is gonna look flat if the shapes are not good. And then once that's done, I put on the color rough. This is the color rough. I just go for the main light color and the main shadow color of all the elements, obviously following the lighting. For this one, I took inspiration from Minion Sensei. I looked at the way they pick and choose colors and like the contrast and all that stuff, which is one thing I'm still working on. When choosing colors and lighting, just pick out the color of the main light. And if you think about the background, say it's sandy, right? But we also have the sky color, so we're gonna be moving towards violet-ish colors in terms of the ambient color and the shadow color. But for the light, we have the sun, obviously, because it's a beach. So we got the yellow color. It's a lot of knowledge about color relationships and color theory. So yeah. So the next thing that we have is the line art. This is pretty self-explanatory. Line art is just line art. Probably one of the most boring parts. I think the line art and base color. This is probably the most boring part for me, because line art sometimes can be pretty fun if you're in the flow, but honestly for the most part you're just really tracing and cleaning up lines, so it's not really the most exciting part of drawing. And also the base colors, you're really just filling up the white spaces, so pretty boring part. But you know, once you get it done, it does make me very very excited to start painting. So it's pretty rewarding at the end. You just gotta stick through it. This is essentially the halfway point. You're basically like 60-70% done, because painting is just relaxing as shit. So far this is the process, and we're gonna get to painting. Alright y'all, so I've divided the painting steps that I do. Essentially it's all just a process, and it's very very helpful and very important to have a process, because me personally, I don't like to use the word style. I don't like to just think of a style as something that just happens, right? I think a style, same with like whatever your personality is right now, is a product of your circumstances and decisions. Therefore, what quote unquote style is essentially just the process that you do in terms of painting and the decisions that you make. Anyways, this is the painting process. Now, after the flats, I firstly go for putting down the key light or shadow. In this case, it's the key light. I painted the light on to the character. Putting down the big shapes, having the main separation. When you're at this stage, you want to zoom out. You don't want to be zooming in and, you know, painting like this. You want to just be painting like this, right? You want to see the whole thing, because you want to see the entire separation and the entire impression of the piece. Because if somebody just looks at the piece for a couple seconds, does it give a strong impression or a good enough impression that it gets your attention? You look at the shapes. Does the character read well? I tend to zoom out a lot, like very very small when I paint, especially at this part. Do these make sense as the legs? Does that make sense as the face? Zoomed out. And then if it does, then good, keep going, and if not, figure it out. It sounds so fucking mean. I'm like, if not, figure it out. Like, there's really no other way to put it. You just really have to figure it out how you have to adjust. The key point here is shapes and form. If you have something that you feel is off, you want to look at the shapes that you're putting onto the canvas to see if you can manipulate those shapes better so that it reads better. Moving on, we have the second shadow for depth. Why do I pronounce depth as like death? Anyways, yeah, this is the second shadow. The overall piece, just extra depth. I also added like some red, some blushes. When I'm adding on the second shadows, I like to be a little bit more conservative. And in terms of deciding how much shadows you want to put, I think it's good to study real life lighting. One, just when you look at real life, a lot of things you realize, things that are in shadow don't really have that much detail, and there's really not much else you can see after the shadow. Understanding that really helps. And also at the same time, study artists, see how much or how little they put in the second shadow kind of category, right? Because it's really just extra depth, extra contrast, but don't put too much because it'll just make the piece too dark. Next up, we got the rendering, I'd add like little gradients, just little bounce lights that set the elements more onto the scene, tie them all together. And at the back as well, we got like the bounce light on this little rod thingy here, airbrushed a little bit more on the leaves right there. These are not really too important, so I don't really spend too much time detailing them. And I also darkened this part here, as you can see. I darkened this area here because Serika is casting a shadow over the top of this. And then some bounce light over there. So yeah, this is the rendering stage. For the rendering stage, essentially, I could just categorize it into stuff like bounce light, reflections, gradations, stuff like that. And also at the same time, making a couple adjustments like darkening some other areas kind of stuff. So yeah, this is more like the rendering, which this second shadow does kind of fall under as well, but it's just more in the face. I also added colored the lines around the face and around the eyes. Next up is the adjustments. I use a tone curve layer, adjustment layer to darken stuff up a little bit more, and I adjusted the shadows around the legs. As you can see, they read way better further than this one, because these look like they're merging too much because they're just all both in the light area, so you just read that as one shape. But once you separate it, add a little bit more shadow and define the form a little bit better of the legs, they read a lot better. And if I go zoom out, as you can see, they look more like separate elements rather than just one whole thing. Next up are the effects, adding some water droplets, you know, because it's in the beach after all. So yeah, that's like the effects part. And then I added some light effects, which is basically just a screen blend mode with a dark orange, and then just airbrushing it gently around the areas where light and shadow meet, and that just gives a little bit more of a pop towards the piece and softens the gradation between the light and shadow and adds a little bit more color. I'm very conservative when it comes to using blend modes because I like to be able to achieve whatever desired effect I want off of just normal layer, you know, more manual and less digitally assisted ways. But whenever I use blend modes, I like to think of them as retouching photos, maybe like using a filter to just make the picture pop a little bit more, but you don't just pick a filter and leave it as is. You want to adjust the filter a little bit to just help it give a little bit more flavor to the picture, but it's not gonna carry the entire thing. So that's kind of how I like to think about using blend modes. That's just me personally. And last but not the least, I just did a little bit more of a tone curve. I used another tone curve layer and just darkened the shadows a little bit to just help the lights pop. As you can see, just a very subtle darkening, but it helps make the piece pop a lot more. And there's actually one part I forgot to do, so we'll do that right now. I just like to use filter, render, Perlin noise, scale. This gives a paper-like texture to the piece. So let's do that. Overlay. Like 15. And yeah, just gives a little bit of a paper texture to the piece. And yeah, this is basically done. This is my entire illustration process. So yeah, if you guys have any questions regarding the certain parts of the process or like the entire process, feel free to leave it down below. And if it did help you, leave a like, leave a comment if it helped you. And I'm gonna see y'all in the next video. Thank y'all everyone so much for watching. And yeah. I gotta cut my nails. What the fuck?